Again in studio, this time about safety, but also how to prevent any disease. To understand different forms of the heart is very important for people that look for health. The health is very important part of human. If humans do not understand simple health, everything is lost. Of course, different forms of bronchitis appears for different forms of people that lives in extreme poverty. It is also important actually to build a better future in health. So to prevent any form of cancer in this world and to prevent sugar, that is not easy, but also to understand different forms of life and how life actually exists. To understand that people should actually go in different forms of the forest around the world and breathe fresh air instead of being in cold rooms is very important for people that actually have any disease. You should actually go in forest for more than 3 hours and you should breathe for a long time. It's not easy to understand life, but it's also not easy to understand better forms of the disease from A and all the worlds down to the Z. To understand different forms of allergy is also important, so you can understand how the skin improves. Myself represent the brand Nivea all over the world, but also different forms of fiction in book, together with the allergy that people under 21 have. To understand different forms together with soft products, it's also important. So you are going to build better products for your company. Of course, you can also build immune system, specially designed for your type of skin, but also for the color of your skin. So your pigments or your skin are not going to be more dark, and they are not going to be more light, but directly the type of your skin. Of course, it's not easy to avoid all forms of infections if you have more partners, so it's very important to use simple philosophy but also contraceptions. There are millions of kinds of contraceptions, and the most important kind is that you never touch other human. However, it's very important to understand safety but also to be complicated with health if you see any form of the net. To evolve net is not easy because you are going to develop different forms of health, but also different forms of the evil together with evolutional people and communities around the world. To understand biology in America, it's not easy. As same, it's not easy to understand biology in Europe, but also in England, to understand livings and different forms of things is not easy, but also to understand photography, that's only an object and not something alive. To understand that form of selections is not easy, and you can even determine different species around the world. Different forms of the fossils around the world appears together with calcium and carbonate. And of course, some people are going to think that some photos are even animals, specially designed in fiction. Probably that could be even correct. The problem of fiction is that sometimes it becomes reality, and it's not problem at all. Of course, some fiction museums are extremely paleontology, which is of course more biology for them. To understand different forms of female photos is not easy. There are even volcanic photos, but floods also. To understand evidence of that type is not easy, and what could happen to women, but also how women sometimes affect men, especially in bed. To understand different forms of safety there is also important. Sometimes it's also better to be complex in life because you don't know what type of evolution is actually killing you more. Because sometimes more is better, but usually in 90% more it's not better. Hydrogenology, of course, it's not easy, but also paleontology. You are going to find out that some photos are even some sort of United States of America fossils. The evolution in America, of course, do not exist because Americans only see different forms of the burgers and JavaScript. Of course, to understand earth science in America it's not easy, but it's also not easy to understand the science of earth in Europe. If you are more sensitive, of course, you are going to also find the people that have some common sense with simple beauty of understanding some material forms. It is very important to understand different forms together with amorphoric rocks, but also the types together with code. It is very important to understand different forms of ideas together with lawyers, but also to understand law, especially basic law together with the art and your artist's rights, especially in America. Or you are going to see a lot of fraud next to celebrity people. To understand simple forms, also the law in France together with art is also important. And once you understand that, you will see that there is a lot of different forms together with the systems that appears in your life. Slightly strange to build health in France. But of course, if you are building book, that is also not easy phenomenon. To understand Rome and the health of the Rome together with law, it's not easy. But of course, the entire America, the civil and military reforms, together with supports, have some basics in simple laws of art. And art, it's not cheap. The largest city in the world might be TT. That's not car, but some sort of military. Of course, you can have millions of different forms and different orders for yourself, or understanding different forms of ZZ together with AA certification that my picture actually can afford, but also give some rights to other, but not everything. To have limits in your business is very important, but also to understand different forms of emperors in history. Of course, you should actually avoid any forms of violence, but also to avoid religion. Of course, in photography, sometimes religion is also important because that's how you see how much fiction is in photography. To understand fiction is not easy, especially with photography of Bible. And if you understand different forms of inspirations and what people say, you will understand that 90% of texts are 100% fiction when it comes to Bible. To understand different forms of Hebrew forms, also different forms of business in life is not easy. To understand discussions about health, it's also very complicated. But also myself patented some text of myself, together with different forms of the book. You are going to see if you are going to agree to the terms of it. To understand standardizations in this world is not easy, especially better standards for skin in all brands of cream in world. To understand that form of poverty in life, it's not easy, but if you build the rules for better skins, you are going to build a much better city you live in, but also, if you have some luck, a better world. Of course, poverty in this world is not simple unit. There are different forms of the standards that appears with different forms of the shape of animal or photo. Of course, on photo you can look on animal or as a figure, but myself look on photo as an object. Of course, photography can have different forms of saying if you think like that. Different numbers appears together with the photography, but usually those numbers are going from side to side, from one corner to other. You can see the left and right side, upper and down side. Of course, also the left, right, 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 the up left and up right forms. To understand different forms of serial numbers on different objects, it's not easy, but also to understand the letters that other models actually offering you. To have unique view on different forms is very important, so you also understand the cryptography together with your picture. There are different forms of letters together with alphabet, but also to understand alphabet are extremely difficult and are actually the poetical form. To understand poetical language it's not easy because it's usually actually originally spoken in Mediterranean region. It's not easy to understand different forms of the Greeks, even some forms of ancient Egyptians. You can also see in my book which is actually valued on $2 million one, so it's not very cheap, but also related with philosophy of gods and Egyptians. To understand the classics in book is not easy, but also to understand different forms of different passions myself have. Also collaborating with gold, but also with different forms of Italian Renaissance. The philosophy behind all York that we have is that there is a lot of classical music, but also the tons of nonsense. In all York, there is a lot of disease because people are not so good. And the generations are very, very difficult, but actually reflect the history of Europe also. The classical period in England is also not easy, but to understand different forms of puzzle together with different forms of organos or pianos are not easy. Influencing different forms of dance is not easy, but also to understand different forms of influence that people have in their life. The people that are from church are usually violent. They don't understand wars. They don't understand kings because they think that's Jesus. And they don't understand Mahatma Gandhi. They don't understand fame. They don't understand any printing. The people in religion, they don't understand politics because they think that's part of religion. They don't even understand other human activity. To understand special forms of emotions that you might build in your life is not easy, but also better hormone together with unconscious mind for modeling. To understand behavior together with psychology is very important. But if you have your partner, there will be some arousal, and probably that's psychology term. To understand liver, stomach, but also the organs and the theory of dark rooms together with different forms of livings is also important. The dark meditation actually means that you are meditating with humans, but also giving them the life without picture. So if all the picture in this world disappear, if all the tastes disappear, if all the smells disappear, if my sound disappear, you are not going to see anything. You are not going to taste anything. You will have my book for $2 million, even if you purchase it much cheaper. But that will be with bonus. And with bonus, it's not always the best. To understand different forms of book map continents with fantasy is also important, including the Africa world, the simple Antarctica purchasings, Asia, Europe, and North America, but also the South America poverty and Oceania, together with South America picture astrology. To understand different forms of Africa is not easy, but also to build better forum for different forms of laws around the world. To understand lives and politics in Africa, it's very, very difficult, but also the human beings there are some sort of extremely, extremely. We should name the Africans are the kings because all richer people in this world and all richer civilizations should actually help and support Africa. Also, my book, if make more than 20 million prints, should actually support the Latin forms of psychology, but also the centuries of African forms together with human progress in printing sectors in Africa. There may see a lot of progress if people would not be so barbarian. Of course, the laws of the culture in Africa are strange, and of course different forms of monarchs appears. To understand skins that are much darker and more black in Africa, it's not easy. But also to understand different forms of psychology, the book kings, ZZ certifications, but also Emperor Forum ZZ certifications together with my book for all that are actually paying for it. For those that are not paying for it, they could never become leaders. And of course, there are also the angels' history, which are millions of artifacts. Very, very difficult kinds and tools. Different forms of mankind that work together with tools, but also different forms of the hammers that appears in art. The art hammers are not easy and are actually the most complex. Some even think that books are weapons, but myself think that books are some sort of simple hammer or some simple astrology. To understand different forms if life is not easy, but also to understand different constructions together with book and architecture. Some people even think that book improve entire infrastructure, but myself think that in book there are millions of materials and 1 million type of different paper and not what you see in your local store and what they are offering in your office store. To understand different forms of the roofs appears in a book together with text, but also to understand groundbreaking methods together with heavy engine described in a story. To understand rising in altruism is not easy, but also to support Africa it's not easy, especially if you are more psychologist. Psychology in life is not easy, but also different forms of laboratory not easy if you are thinking about consistency. To build better English in life, it's not easy. But in life, it's also not easy to build any forms of education because any teaching is 100% illusion. Sometimes it's very important to understand construction so you can actually support Africa with better ideas, but also with better theory for life. Better theory for life also ends if you do not make 1 million book for me, because that is not for me, but is for all other richer and especially for poor people. If you understand that, you'll understand my minimum and why for survival of this planet, it's very important to reach minimum of simple 1 million items, especially also and supporting philosophy of agriculture, the philosophy of surviving, the philosophy of simple forms, but also to understand how toxic different forms of land can be and why fiction can actually build health. To understand social fiction it's not easy because all the finance in social life is fiction. To understand different forms of safety is also important, but also safety in arts and safety in American culture together with safety in European culture publishing. In life, you should actually think about more things, but the most important is that you actually think about health, heart, and kidneys. The health and kidneys, together with simple heart, are going to lead to self. And if you share some support with others, that's the main thing.